A little girl's voice sliced through the heavy silence of a penthouse high above the city. "This is a forgery," said 10-year-old Leah Carter, her words sharp and confident in perfect Arabic. That single sentence, spoken by the daughter of a black maid, brought a $2 billion deal to a dead stop. Men who were leaning in with hungry eyes froze, their dreams of wealth hanging in the air like smoke. The room itself was designed to impress. Marble floors shining under glassy lights, the smell of lemon polish and expensive leather filling every corner. The city outside stretched below in bright yellow threads of taxis weaving like fireflies. Inside, everything was meant to scream power, money, and untouchable authority. At the head of the polished ebony table sat Sheikh Amir Jalal, a man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and eyes that had seen decades of longing. He was moments away from signing a document that he believed would restore his family's honor and secure a vast inheritance. In front of him lay what looked like a centuries-old Arabic deed, stamped with red wax and the crest of his ancestors. Leah's mother, Ruth Carter, moved quietly through the room, dressed in the maid's uniform she wore each day. She poured water, changed glasses, and set down coasters with the soft grace of someone who had learned how to be invisible. Yet her presence did not escape the barbed whispers. "You bring your child here? Guess you can't afford a babysitter," one man muttered with a cruel smirk. These small insults were like grains of sand, too tiny to shatter someone in the moment, but painful enough to leave lasting burns. The door opened with practiced timing. Blake Harrison, a wealthy broker with slicked-back silver hair and a smile honed to perfection, walked in as if the room already belonged to him. His deep voice carried authority, each word rolling with assurance as he turned his attention to Sheikh Amir while letting his eyes slice through Ruth, reducing her to an afterthought. "All risks have been eliminated," Blake declared. "The opportunity before us is flawless." At the corner of the room, Malik Reed, the Sheikh's longtime advisor, stood quietly. He was the kind of man who noticed everything, every nervous glance, every twitch of a hand, every thread that might unravel. The ritual began. Blake pulled out a rolled leather tube, handling it with white gloves as though it contained holy scripture. Slowly, he unrolled the parchment and placed it on the table. The lights caught the Arabic script, the golden tint of the paper, and the bold red wax seal that promised authenticity. He recited the story. This deed represented uncontested ownership of resource-rich land. With it came the promise of $2 billion. Investors leaned forward, their faces lit with greed, drawn in like moths to fire. For the first time in years, Sheikh Amir sat upright, a flash of hope sparking in his weary eyes. On those golden pages, he imagined he could see the shadows of his father, hear the voice of his grandfather. Generations of honor seemed to echo in the script before him. But not everyone was enchanted. Ruth set a coaster down, her hands steady though her mind raced. A man wearing a ring large enough to double as a weapon sneered at her. "Careful," he snapped. "That page is worth more than your life." Her body stiffened, but her daughter was watching. Leah held tight to a worn leather diary, the old journal of her great-great-grandfather, Sergeant Thomas Peterson, a soldier once tasked with protecting heritage during war. His words were etched in her memory: "Dignity is a fortress. Do not let the insults of others breach its walls." Leah's fingers brushed the faded gold lettering on the diary's cover. That was when she noticed something odd. The parchment on the table was too perfect, its surface too smooth, its color too even, like an artificial sunrise. There were no knife scrapes, no uneven textures, no tiny flaws that always existed on real vellum. The ink was black and flat, without the brown halo left by true iron gall ink as it aged. And worst of all, the seal bore a script error, a misplaced dot that should never have existed in the century this document supposedly came from. Sheikh Amir lifted the golden pen prepared for the signing, its heavy nib glinting under the lights. Leah's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The pen began to descend toward the page. She stumbled back, knocking into the side table. A glass fell and shattered against the floor. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Blake's voice was sharp and scolding. "This is a place of business, not a playground. Control the child." Ruth's face drained of color. Leah to the kitchen. Now, she whispered in shame. But Leah didn't move. She locked her eyes on Sheikh Amir, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't in English. From her great-grandfather's diary, she had memorized words in formal Arabic. Her voice rang with authority far beyond her years. This document is fake. The room froze. The men didn't understand the language, but they understood her tone. It wasn't childish defiance, it was certainty. Blake forced a grin, his voice dripping with condescension. A little tick-tock trick. Cute. But beneath his mask of confidence, a flicker of fear betrayed him. Malik tilted his head, sensing something real. Sheikh Amir lowered the pen. His voice was calm, measured. Prove it. The penthouse no longer felt like a business meeting. In an instant it became a courtroom. Leah stepped forward, the ribbon in her hair catching the light. She placed Sergeant Peterson's diary on the massive table, rested her hand on it as if drawing strength, and began to explain. You don't need to be old to see the truth. You just need to know where to look. First, the paper. True vellum from the 1600s was made from calfskin, scraped by hand. It always shows thin patches, sometimes even holes. This sheet is too perfect, uniform like it came from a factory. She lifted the edge of the parchment under the light. Malik dimmed the chandelier slightly, and the surface glowed evenly without the flaws of real vellum. Second, the ink. Real iron gall ink doesn't just fade, it eats into the paper, leaving brown halos like burn marks. This ink sits flat on top, no bite, no halo. Too clean. Investors began murmuring nervously. Some leaned closer, unwilling to touch but curious to see. And third, the seal. Leah pointed directly at it. The script here places a dot on the letter FA. But in the era this claims to be from, that dot didn't exist. It was only standardized much later, during Ottoman reforms in the late 1700s. Whoever forged this didn't know their history. They left the wrong mark, the wrong dot, from the wrong century. Her words landed like a final gavel strike. Silence swept the room. Malik, now fully alert, handed the sheikh a magnifier. Amir examined the seal closely, his eyes narrowing. The misplaced dot glared back at him like a scar. Blake tried to laugh it off, speaking louder, trying to reclaim control. My expert. But no one was listening to him anymore. They were listening to the truth. The room hung heavy with silence. Everyone was watching Sheikh Amir, waiting to see if he would dismiss the little girl or listen to her. His fingers tightened on the magnifier as he studied the seal again. The misplaced dot stared back at him like a confession. Bring Professor Hale on a secure line, Amir finally ordered, his voice calm but firm. Malik acted immediately, dialing the respected historian. A moment later, the large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The image of Professor Omar Hale, a white-bearded scholar surrounded by towering shelves of books, filled the screen. His sharp but kind eyes gave the room a sudden gravity. After a brief exchange of greetings, Malik turned the camera toward the parchment. The lens zoomed in over the paper's golden surface, the ink strokes, and finally the red wax seal. The misplaced dot on the FA letter filled the screen, enlarged until no one could deny it. For a long time, Professor Hale said nothing. His silence carried more weight than any speech. It was the silence of a man recognizing something wrong. When he finally spoke, his words were deliberate. This is a forgery. Skillfully done, yes. But historically inaccurate. The materials don't match the period. The ink doesn't match. And the seal, this dot does not belong to the 17th century. It is as obvious as finding a zipper on a knight's armor. Gasps rippled through the investors. Some leaned back as if the document itself had turned poisonous. One man reached for his phone to call his lawyer. Another looked pale, realizing millions he had already committed were based on a lie. Blake's jaw dropped. His confident smile vanished. His mouth opened and closed, caught between denial and panic. Wait, he stammered. My expert said. But Sheikh Amir raised a hand. That small gesture silenced everyone. Kareem, he said firmly, call security. No one leaves this floor. Two large men stepped out from the shadows near the doorway, their presence undeniable. Blake's face drained of color. His slick mask of power had fallen apart, replaced by fear. The room, once filled with talk of billions, was now nothing but broken illusions. When the chaos faded, only 3 people remained at the center of it all: Sheikh Amir, Ruth, and Leah. The fraudulent document lay on the table like an empty shell. Amir removed his glasses, placed them gently on the polished surface, and turned toward Leah. He studied her, not with skepticism but with respect. Leah said nothing. Her silence carried the weight of truth. For a moment time seemed to pause. Amir slowly bent forward in a full bow toward the little girl. Not the shallow nod of politeness, but a genuine bow of gratitude and humility. In a room where everyone else had been expected to bow to him, this was an act that cracked open centuries of hierarchy. "My honor and my fortune," Amir said in a steady voice, "were not saved by wealth nor by my advisors. They were saved by a little girl with clear eyes, and by the words of a great-grandfather who chose integrity over comfort." Ruth's hands trembled as she clasped them together, unsure whether she and her daughter were about to be dismissed or recognized. Leah simply stood still, the old diary pressed to her chest. She had said enough. But the evening was not finished. Amir led them to a hidden elevator at the far end of the room. Its wooden wall slid open with a quiet hum, revealing mirrored panels glowing with amber light. "This place is for business," Amir murmured. "But where truth belongs is in a home." They stepped inside, the doors closing behind them. The city lights blurred into streaks as the elevator descended. Ruth glanced at her daughter, giving her a small nod, a silent reminder that no matter what happened, she was still her mother, and Leah was still her little girl. When the doors opened, they entered a library unlike anything Leah had ever seen. 2 stories tall, wrapped in dark wooden shelves, the space breathed history. An iron spiral staircase curved upward like a piece of music frozen in metal. Persian carpets spread across the floor like oceans of color. The air carried the warm scent of old books, leather bindings, and beeswax polish. Leah's eyes widened as she stepped forward, taking in the rows of book spines, the golden lettering shimmering in Arabic, Latin, and Greek. In the center of the room stood a glass display case filled with priceless artifacts: clay tablets, ancient papyrus, a 10th century Quran lined with gold leaf and lapis blue borders. "Come in," Amir said softly. For the first time since they had met him, his voice carried no edge of command. Leah reached out and gently brushed her fingertips across the spine of a black-bound book, whispering its title as though practicing a secret. Ruth stood behind her, hands still clasped in the old habit of service. But her eyes had shifted, no longer guarded, only watching. Amir walked slowly toward the glass case. "My father began this collection," he explained. "Then my grandfather, then me. It is the one treasure I have never hidden from the world." Inside the case, among bronze fragments and ivory carvings, rested a dagger. Its steel blade shimmered with the rippled patterns of Damascus craftsmanship. The hilt gleamed with silver filigree, intricate and dazzling. Leah tilted her head. Something about it felt wrong. She stepped closer, her small hand pressing against the glass. Her voice was soft but steady. "Mr. Jalal, this dagger doesn't belong to one time period. The blade is real, yes. Damascus steel, 12th century. But the hilt, that silver work, is much later. Ottoman era. 16th or 17th century. Someone attached a newer hilt to an older blade to make it more valuable." Ruth's breath caught. The room shifted again. For a second, Amir's eyes narrowed, his pride bristling at the idea. "This dagger is a family heirloom. The British Museum itself confirmed it in 1958. But Leah did not step back. She simply repeated what she knew. "My great-grandfather called pieces like this a marriage. Both parts are real, but they were joined together later. That's why it feels wrong." The silence that followed was sharp. Then, unexpectedly, Amir laughed. Not bitterly but freely, as if a lock had been opened inside him. "In one night," he said with wonder, "you have saved me from a false $2 billion deal and broken apart a family legend. You are the most expensive guest I have ever welcomed, and the most valuable." He closed the glass lid gently and walked to a small desk. Pulling out his checkbook, he paused with pen in hand. His eyes shifted from the paper to Ruth and Leah. Money feels crude right now, he admitted. Not because I cannot give it, but because it is the wrong language. I owe you both something that does not lose value. Turning to Ruth, his voice softened. I want to invite you to become the curator of this collection. Not a cleaner, not invisible hands. It's caretaker. It's guardian. You will live here with full dignity and every resource to do this work properly. Ruth's mouth opened, then closed again. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Then Amir faced Leah. And you? I will not give you a reward. I will give you a responsibility. This library will be your classroom and your playground. I want to create a trust, named after Sergeant Thomas Peterson, dedicated to uncovering the truth in history. You will help me. You will be my truth detector. Leah's chest rose and fell as though she had been handed a great instrument. She placed her hand in Amir's. I accept, she said. Then she added, but only if we start with that dagger. Amir smiled, a true smile this time. Of course. That night they did not sign contracts. Instead, they sat at the long library table, sketching out the beginning of a new life. Ruth spoke of her great-grandfather's wisdom, how his words carried strength without shouting. Leah opened her diary, pointing to notes about how real ink eats into paper and how old wax cracks with age. Malik brought names of trusted labs and honest scholars. Amir drew 3 boxes on a sheet of paper: paper, ink, seal. Then he added a 4th, story. No truth stands alone, he said. It must always rest on method. And with that, the work of rebuilding trust and uncovering truth began. The first morning in their new home felt like waking into another life. Sunlight spilled into the apartment through wide glass windows, no longer filtered through dusty bars or flickering streetlights. The air smelled fresh, not like bleach from someone else's floor but like roasted coffee, clean and bright. At the kitchen table, Ruth poured 2 cups and slid one toward Leah. For the first time, there was enough space for them to sit across from each other without bumping elbows. On the wall above the table, Amir had ordered a fresh shelf to be installed. It stood empty, waiting for Leah's books and journals. Ruth studied her daughter carefully. Are you afraid this is too much for you to handle? She asked. Leah bit into her toast, thinking. I'm not afraid of the work, she answered honestly. I'm afraid of being wrong. But I'll check. Ruth smiled, recognizing those words as the beginning of a profession. Later that morning, the 3 of them, Amir, Ruth, and Leah, gathered in the library. It was no longer just Amir's collection. It was a shared vault of truth, a place where history would be questioned, tested, and preserved. The first case on the table was the Damascus dagger. Malik had arranged for tests at a partner laboratory. Weeks passed while they waited for results. The lab examined the blade under high-powered microscopes, scanned the silver hilt with X-ray fluorescence, and tested the alloy composition. When the report finally arrived, it confirmed what Leah had seen. The blade was authentic 12th century Damascus steel, but the hilt was 16th or 17th century Ottoman work. Adhesive traces at the joint proved they had been married together centuries later. Ruth filed the report neatly in the new record book, her handwriting precise and tight, as if sealing the truth in ink. She wrote a guiding principle on the first page: respect the object, respect the person. What had once been her habit as a maid, right place, right time, right clean, transformed into something new: right provenance, right era, right preservation. She was no longer invisible. She was the curator. Meanwhile, Leah threw herself into her studies. Tutors came daily. An elderly Latin teacher with chalk-dusted hair showed her how a tiny mark could change an entire meaning. A graduate student taught her how to angle a magnifying glass over paper fibers and how to photograph documents without casting shadows. Together, they discovered watermarks hidden in letters once thought authentic. In one case, the paper manufacturer's date revealed the document was a forgery, created centuries after it claimed to be written. Amir looked at the report and shook his head with a weary chuckle. I bought a souvenir of someone's drunken night, he muttered. Leah scribbled in her notebook, drunken men believe memories can be bought. Each time they uncovered a forgery, Amir's shoulders sagged, but his eyes grew brighter. He no longer spoke of restoring family glory. He spoke of restoring honesty. In the evenings, Leah would copy down her great-grandfather's sayings from the old diary. One line she taped to the shelf above her desk. Most forgeries fail because forgers trust others will be lazy-eyed. The Vault of Truth, as they began to call the library, grew into a workshop of 3 people. Ruth spotted small inconsistencies with her sharp eye for detail. Leah asked the questions no one else thought to ask. And Amir, once a man chasing wealth, began to understand the difference between power and integrity. Outside their walls, Blake Harrison's reputation unraveled quickly. Newspapers called him a fraud, exposing years of deceptive sales and shady deals. Some collectors panicked, calling Malik to have their own treasures re-examined. Others stayed silent, hoping not to be caught in the storm. But Amir did not celebrate. He asked himself a harder question late at night as he studied an old map with Leah. Why was I so eager to believe? The answer came quietly. Because memory makes the heart hungry, he admitted. And I bought bread made of paper. A month later, Amir invited a small group into the library, not billionaires or politicians but curators, historians and conservators. People who truly understood what history meant. Ruth stood by his side with a name tag that read Ruth Carter, curator. Leah wore a blue dress, her ribbon tied neatly in her hair, and carried her great-grandfather's diary like a badge of honor. Standing on the Persian carpet, Amir spoke without a microphone. For too long, he said, we have treated history like merchandise. We buy what makes us look powerful and we sell what makes us look beautiful. But history is not theater. It is discipline. Its foundation is truth. He spoke of Sergeant Thomas Peterson, the soldier he had never met yet now owed his fortune to. He described the afternoon when his pen froze above a contract worth billions because of one misplaced dot. A single dot, Amir said, preserved the dignity of an entire room. Then he invited Leah to the front. Leah raised the diary and spoke with simple clarity. My great-grandfather taught me that every object tells a story. Some stories are true. Some are lies. Our job is to listen closely enough to know which is which. That day I only did one thing. I listened to the dot. The room filled with soft smiles, the kind that come when truth is spoken plainly. By the end of the gathering, the Sergeant Thomas Peterson Integrity of History Fund was officially created. Its mission, to sponsor authentication work, teach the public how to read objects properly, and publish forgery cases not to shame people, but to teach method. Leah was named its first honorary fellow. It was half a joke, she still had multiplication tables to master, but everyone knew she had earned it. That night, after the guests left, only Amir, Ruth and Leah remained in the library. They sat by the glass case where the dagger rested, now correctly labeled as a marriage piece. People love to attach a glittering hilt to everything, Amir said, his voice heavy with thought. Because they believe the blade alone isn't enough. They don't trust the truth, Ruth answered quietly. Leah looked at the dagger one last time, then closed her notebook. Tomorrow, she said, let's test the explorer's letters again. I want to try UV light. Maybe the ink will reveal more. Amir nodded. Tomorrow. He no longer needed to say thank you. The word tomorrow already carried all the gratitude in the world. Outside, the city lights dimmed as if pausing between breaths. Inside the Vault of Truth, the 3 of them stayed longer than necessary, not because they didn't know what to do, but because they knew exactly what to do, and wanted to hold on to that feeling. The work had just begun. 2 weeks after the scandal in the penthouse, the storm had moved from boardrooms to courtrooms. Blake Harrison's name was everywhere, in newspapers, on television, and splattered across online debates. Some headlines called him a brilliant con man. Others described him as a fallen expert. His allies scrambled, and his lawyers tried to protect what was left of his reputation. But in the library the work didn't stop. For Ruth, Leah, and Amir, the Vault of Truth had become their second heartbeat. Every day Ruth cataloged artifacts with care, placing each item into clean trays and recording its history. She began each entry with the same rule she had written on the first page. Respect the object, respect the person. For the first time in her life, her hands were not just cleaning, they were preserving. Leah's schedule grew heavier too. She studied ancient languages in the mornings, tested inks in the afternoons, and spent her evenings cataloging notes with her mother. Tutors rotated in and out. One showed her how different types of paper fibers looked under light, another taught her how to analyze seals through photographs. Slowly, Leah became less of a child who stumbled into a revelation and more of a student learning a discipline. It was exhausting and thrilling. One evening, Malik entered the library with a sealed brown envelope. He placed it on the table and pushed it toward Amir. "It came from an old warehouse," Malik explained. "Someone said these boxes haven't been touched since the 1960s. They thought you should see them." Ruth carefully untied the string around the bundle. The smell of mildew rose, sharp and earthy. Inside were hand-drawn maps, old photographs, and letters dated from the late 1800s. Leah pulled on her gloves and began lifting the pages one by one. She read slowly. The words spoke of shared land, rotating water rights, and agreements between 3 clans. The tone was cooperative, not absolute. Leah looked up at Amir. "Grandfather," she said softly, using the word with hesitation, "the story of your family's absolute ownership, it might have come later. These letters say something different. They describe land as shared, not claimed forever." The room grew colder. A draft seemed to pass through, as if the words themselves had unsettled the air. Amir sank into a chair. His eyes scanned the plain handwriting again and again. Finally he whispered, "If truth does not stand with me, then I will stand with truth." That night he gave Malik new orders. Every letter, every map, every record from the old boxes would be copied, digitized, and cross-referenced with the forged deed that Leah had exposed. "No more chasing glory," Amir said firmly. "Our task is to name the past correctly." Not long after, an unexpected visitor arrived at the library. A young man in a plain suit stood at the door, his eyes red, his shoulders tight. "I used to work for Blake Harrison," he admitted quietly. "I came to apologize." From inside his jacket he pulled out a black notebook. On its pages were sketches of seals, notes on dots, and even appointments with a paper mill that specialized in fake antique parchment. "I hate him," the man said, his voice breaking. "But I hate myself more for helping him." Malik accepted the notebook without judgment. "You can do the right thing now," he told him. The young man's name never appeared in the official record. He asked only to remain anonymous, to let his contribution stand without credit. That weekend the core team gathered, Amir, Ruth, Leah, Malik, and Professor Hale joining by video. Together they wrote a new set of rules, the foundation of the vault's mission. Ruth held the pen steady as Leah dictated. 1. Let the object speak first. 2. Slow is fast. 3. Never attack individuals, only publish method. 4. Accept truth even when it makes us smaller. 5. Every conclusion must remain open to correction when new evidence appears. At the top of the page, Leah wrote by hand, "Code of Truth." Her handwriting was steady, as though laying the first stone of a bridge. Night fell, and Amir stood by the library balcony, gazing at the spiral staircase. "I once wanted to seal the past with a stamp," he thought aloud. "But the past does not want to be sealed. It only wants to be touched carefully." Down below, Leah tilted an old letter beneath the light until faint brown ink revealed itself like a secret. She smiled. History was speaking. And it spoke softly only to those patient enough to listen. Days later, a small brass plaque appeared outside the vault's doors. Sergeant Thomas Peterson, Integrity of History Fund. The launch ceremony was modest. A few dozen historians, a handful of students, and some collectors who admitted to buying the wrong things. Amir spoke briefly. This fund was not created to shame. It was created to protect method. Then he stepped aside for Leah. She didn't read a speech. Instead, she placed a Conchiera vase on the table and turned on a UV lamp. Under the light, bright streaks glowed across the glaze, proof it was a 20th century reproduction, not a true relic. Gasps filled the room. Not because someone had been embarrassed, but because the truth had been revealed so clearly. From that moment on, Leah's schedule grew even tighter. Twice a week she practiced ancient Greek. Other days she tested ink components using portable equipment. Sometimes she led small group sessions for students, teaching them how to slow down and let the object speak. One boy raised his hand nervously. "But what if we don't have a lab? How do we know what's real?" Leah smiled, lifting a magnifying glass to the light. "You start by slowing down. Hold the paper to the lamp. Ask yourself, what here has a reason to exist? And always ask, if I'm wrong, how will I correct it?" Ruth, standing nearby, smiled with pride. Her daughter was not just learning history. She was becoming its gatekeeper. Outside the library, Blake Harrison's legal team launched a desperate campaign. They accused Amir of slander, tried to paint Leah as a child manipulated by adults, and pushed clips online that twisted the story. Hashtags flared. Supporters argued. Critics sneered. But inside the vault, the team didn't argue back. They answered with documents, with files, with method. Case File 001, the date of the dot, was published quietly. It included magnified photos of the ink, charts of paper fibers, and side-by-side comparisons of seals. On the first page, Leah had written her own explanation. "I said it was fake because the paper didn't sing, the ink didn't bite, and the dot was born too late." Her words, simple and clear, cut through noise better than any headline. The vault of truth had found its rhythm. And though Blake Harrison still fought in public, his grip was loosening. Slowly, steadily, the truth was winning. The battle over truth shifted to a larger stage. Professor Hale invited Amir and Leah to present their findings at the university's faculty hall. Not behind closed doors, but in front of scholars, curators, and students. The event would be live-streamed, watched by experts around the world. When Malik shared the invitation, Ruth's heart skipped. "She's only 10, she whispered. "They'll eat her alive." But Leah sat quietly, her diary resting on her lap. "If the dot is wrong, it's wrong," she said simply. "Even adults will hear that." The day of the presentation arrived. The hall was filled with gray sweaters, glasses perched on noses, and notebooks ready. Some scholars looked at Leah with skepticism, others with curiosity. To them, she was just a child who had stumbled into a media storm. But Leah walked to the lectern with steady steps. She placed her great-grandfather's diary down, adjusted the microphone to her height, and began without hesitation. "I will show you 3 things," she said, her voice clear. "First, paper. Second, ink. Third, the seal." The screen behind her lit up with slides. Slide 1, real vellum. Thin patches like moon spots, fibers like fingerprints. Always uneven because it was scraped by hand. She pointed to the glowing image of a genuine page. Slide 2, the deed Blake Harrison tried to sell. The surface is smooth, uniform, flawless, like factory cloth. "That's chemical aging, not real history." Whispers moved through the room. Slide 3, the seal. Enlarged, the letter FA has a bold dot. But in that time period it was always undotted or had a tiny inverted V. The dotted FA didn't appear until Ottoman reforms much later. "This deed claims the wrong century. 1 dot, but it changes everything." Her words were followed by silence. Then a man with gray hair stood. "If the forgery is so good, could the forger have copied details from a neighboring region?" Leah nodded respectfully. "That is exactly what we must test. But here are 3 authentic seals from that region, all dated correctly. Not one has the dot. The dot only appears consistently after the 18th century. The forger knew much, but not enough to count the small details." The slides changed again. 3 comparative photos, annotated dates, sources cited. A woman near the front scribbled furiously in her notebook. A man in the back whispered, "She's right." Professor Hale finally stood. His voice carried the weight of experience. "This council confirms the document is a forgery. The methodology is correct. This case will be published as a teaching model." The room, once doubtful, erupted into quiet applause. Scholars who had frowned at the beginning now lined up to shake Amir's hand. One curator leaned down to Leah. "I studied under Professor Hale 15 years ago. Today I learned something from you." Leah bowed her head. "I just listened to the dot," she replied. But while truth won inside the hall, Blake Harrison was not finished outside. That very night, his PR team pushed a clipped video online. It showed Leah at the lectern but cut out the context. The caption read, "Child exploited to ruin an expert's career." Hashtags exploded. Supporters defended him. Trolls mocked Leah. Ruth shut off the screen halfway through. The comments were too cruel, too sharp. She remembered the nights she had scrubbed strangers' floors, hearing them mock the help. Now they mocked her daughter. "You don't owe them anything," Ruth told Leah, her voice firm. Leah nodded, but instead of replying, she reopened case file 001 and checked her footnotes again. She wasn't interested in winning arguments online. The truth didn't fight in the marketplace. It walked quietly into archives. The next morning, Malik entered the vault carrying a heavy bundle wrapped in faded cloth. "This came from a driver connected to your family," he told Amir. "It was sitting in storage for decades." Inside were more letters, invoices, and hand-drawn maps. One letter, dated 1891, described land shared between clans with rotating water rights and seasonal meetings. Leah's hands trembled as she read aloud. "Grandfather, the story of absolute ownership, it isn't here. These letters tell of shared land." Amir closed his eyes. The truth pressed hard against him, heavier than gold. "If truth doesn't stand with me," he whispered, "I will stand with truth." From that moment, his mission changed. It was no longer about restoring a lost legacy. It was about telling the past by its right name. Days later, another knock came at the vault's door. A young man stood there, the same former assistant who had once delivered the black notebook of Blake's secrets. His eyes were still tired, but this time there was resolve in his voice. "I work at a used bookstore now," he said. "I learned to catalog books and write provenance correctly. I just wanted to thank you." Malik handed him a printed copy of the Code of Truth. "Take it," he said simply. "Use it for your work. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to everyone." The young man folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket. Before leaving, he looked at Leah. "Thank you for not making noise," he said quietly. "You made it clear." Leah tilted her head and smiled. "I just listened." That evening, the team gathered again. Amir, Ruth, Leah, Malik, and Professor Hale on the screen. Together they drafted their next steps. They would publish the Code of Truth. They would release their first case files publicly. They would make their method open so anyone could learn. As Ruth smoothed the pages into a binder, she whispered almost to herself, "Right place, right time, right clean, and now right truth." The Vault of Truth had stopped being only a library. It had become a movement. And the small voice of a 10-year-old girl was now echoing far beyond its walls. The weeks that followed were not easy. Outside the walls of the vault, the storm grew louder. Blake Harrison's lawyers launched attack after attack, demanding the fund stop calling the deed a forgery. Articles appeared in tabloids painting him as a victim of jealousy, claiming a child's opinion had destroyed decades of his work. Some people believed him. Others didn't. The noise was constant. But inside the Vault of Truth, the team refused to argue in the mud. They answered with patience, documents, and method. Malik prepared a thick dossier labeled Case File 001, the date of the dot. It contained photographs of the forged deed, side-by-side comparisons with authentic seals, charts of ink and paper analysis, and citations from published sources. On the opening page, Leah had written her explanation in her own words. "I said it was fake because the paper didn't sing under the light, the ink didn't bite into the page, and the dot was born too late." 3 simple lines, but powerful enough to silence 1,000 rumors. One afternoon, Professor Hale called Amir directly. "We can't let a tabloid rewrite this story," he said firmly. "I want to hold an open assessment. Faculty hall. Live-streamed. Step by step. No insults, no shouting. Just proper method." Amir agreed instantly. "Let the girl open," he added. Professor Hale chuckled. "That was my thought as well. Adults need to hear the truth in a child's voice. It reminds them of what they've forgotten." The day of the assessment arrived. The hall filled quickly with historians, curators, conservators, and students. Some had come to support. Some had come to challenge. And many had come simply out of curiosity, To see the girl who stopped a $2 billion fraud with a single sentence. Leah adjusted the microphone again, set her diary on the lectern and began. First, paper, she said, holding up 2 slides. This is real vellum. Notice the thin patches, the translucent streaks, the tiny holes where fibers tore. Now look at Harrison's deed. Smooth. Even. Too perfect. Machine made, not hand scraped. She switched slides. Second ink. Real iron gall ink bites the paper. It eats into the fibers, leaving brown halos like burn marks. Harrison's deed has carbon ink. It sits on top, no bite, no halo. Too clean. She switched again. Third, the seal. The letter FA. Dotted. But in that time and place the dot didn't exist. It only appears later, during Ottoman reforms in the late 1700s. This deed claims the wrong century. 1 dot, but 1 dot changes everything. The room was quiet, every ear straining to catch her words. A professor in the audience raised his hand. But couldn't a skilled forger have copied features from another region? Leah nodded. That's possible. Which is why we compare across sources. Here are 3 authentic seals from the region, all dated correctly. Not one has the dot. Forgers often know a lot, but they forget that truth lives in the smallest details. The slides shifted, showing comparative photos annotated with dates. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some heads nodded. Others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Professor Hale stood at last. This council declares Harrison's document a forgery. The method is sound. The evidence is clear. This case will be published as a model of authentication. The applause was quiet but steady. People who had dismissed Leah at first now leaned down to shake her hand. One older woman smiled warmly. I've been doing this work for 30 years, she said. Today I was reminded that truth doesn't care about age. Leah bowed her head. I just listened to the dot. But outside the hall the storm raged on. That evening, Blake Harrison's PR team pushed another video online. This time it showed Leah in close-up, her words cut short and stripped of context. The caption read, "Exploited child destroys heritage expert." The clip spread fast. Comments piled up. Some defended Leah. Others mocked her. Ruth shut the laptop in anger. You don't owe them an answer, she said, her voice steady. Leah didn't argue. She simply opened her notebook, checked her notes again and went back to work. She knew the truth didn't need to shout. It only needed to stand. The next morning, Malik entered the vault carrying a cloth-bound bundle tied with twine. This came from the Jalal family warehouse, he explained. Untouched boxes, forgotten since the 1960s. Amir's hands trembled as he loosened the ties. The smell of old paper and mildew rose, sharp and damp. Inside were letters, maps and photographs. One letter, dated 1891, described shared land, rotating water rights and seasonal agreements between clans. Leah read the words carefully. Grandfather, she whispered, the story of total ownership isn't here. These letters describe cooperation, not control. Amir stared at the page. For years he had dreamed of reclaiming glory. Now the truth was stripping that dream away. He closed his eyes. If truth does not stand with me, he said softly, then I will stand with truth. That evening the team gathered in the library, Amir, Ruth, Leah, Malik and Professor Hale on screen. They read the letters, studied the maps and compared them to the forged deed. The evidence was clear. Blake's forgery had not only been fake, it had twisted history itself. We must name the past correctly, Amir said. Even if it makes us smaller. Ruth wrote the phrase in the ledger. Name the past correctly. Late that night, Amir stood alone in the library, gazing at the dagger in its case. Once it had been a symbol of pride. Now it was a reminder, even beautiful objects can carry false stories. Behind him, Leah was still awake, tilting an old envelope beneath the lamp. The ink shimmered faintly, revealing words invisible in daylight. She smiled. History was speaking again. And she was ready to listen. The days after the academic hearing brought a new rhythm to the vault. While the outside world debated hashtags and headlines, inside the library truth was being rebuilt, one page at a time. Every morning Ruth opened the record book and began with her steady handwriting. She cataloged each item carefully: title, description, condition, provenance. Her old habits as a maid had turned into a discipline of preservation. Where she once placed coasters and polished glass, she now placed labels and acid-free sleeves. She no longer served in silence. She curated with authority. Leah's studies deepened too. Her tutors challenged her with ancient Greek exercises, microscopic analysis of fibers, and UV light examinations of glazes. She stumbled often, but she always corrected herself. When she made mistakes, she recorded them in red ink in the ledger, signing her name under each one. Amir had told her, "What matters is not avoiding errors. What matters is writing them down." One afternoon, Malik arrived with news that turned the vault into a battlefield of paper. "Blake's lawyers have filed a civil case," he reported. "They claim the fund is slandering his reputation. They want damages." Amir didn't flinch. "We will not fight with words. We will fight with documents." Together they prepared Case File 002, the marriage dagger. They documented the blade and hilt separately, the Damascus steel proven by metallurgical scans, the Ottoman filigree confirmed by style and date. They added photos of the adhesive residue at the joint, magnified under the lens. At the end, Leah wrote a note in her small, steady script. "A beautiful object does not need a false story to be precious. We honor it by calling it by its right name." When the file was published, scholars praised its clarity. Collectors began sending requests for their own pieces to be examined. The vault was no longer just a library. It had become a trusted authority. But the work was exhausting. One night, Amir found Ruth in the storage room, her head resting against a cabinet. "You're carrying too much," he told her. She shook her head. "I carried other people's houses my whole life. This is the first time I'm carrying my own." He didn't argue. Instead, he gave her a new space, a cleared-out storage room, lined with fresh cabinets and drawers. "This is yours," he said. Ruth ran her hand along a drawer handle. It felt like holding the key to her own home. She picked up a brush and inked one sentence on the wall: "Right place, right time, right clean, right truth." The vault was building not just files but a philosophy. Still, Blake Harrison didn't give up. His PR team pushed stories online, painting him as a visionary misunderstood by jealous rivals. They called the vault's work overzealous nitpicking and childish noise. Leah ignored the noise. She was busy with a new discovery. While examining an old letter under UV light, she noticed a watermark hidden in the paper, a manufacturer's mark that didn't match the date of the writing. The letter, once celebrated as authentic, was a forgery. She recorded the finding in her notebook and whispered to herself, "Truth always shows itself if you're patient." One evening, as rain lashed against the library windows, Amir poured tea and turned to Leah. "If I hadn't believed you that first day, if I had signed the deed, what would have happened?" Leah looked up, her face thoughtful. "The truth would still be there," she said. "It just would have taken longer to find." Amir smiled softly. "Then I've learned something. Real power isn't in signing the line. It's in stopping the pen at the right moment." Leah repeated the words like a lesson: "Stop the pen." That phrase became the vault's motto, whispered among the team whenever doubt tried to creep in. Meanwhile, the outside world was changing. News of Blake's fraud spread further. Collectors who once admired him now questioned every purchase. Museums began reviewing their inventories. Students flocked to the vault's free workshops, eager to learn how to hold paper to the light, how to test ink, how to read seals. Leah stood before them, guiding their hands, reminding them to slow down. "Don't rush," she would say. "Objects don't shout. They whisper. Your job is to listen." One boy asked her, "Do you ever get scared being so young in rooms full of grown-ups?" Leah tilted her magnifying glass, letting the light circle across a fiber. "I see I have a job," she answered. "If I do it well, everything else will fall into place." Ruth watched her daughter with quiet pride. She remembered all the rooms where Leah had been forced to shrink, to be invisible. Now, for the first time, her daughter was standing tall without having to grow up too fast. The storm outside continued, But inside the vault of truth, they were steady. They had found their rhythm. They had found their code. And even though the world was still shouting, they had learned the value of stopping the pen and listening. By the time autumn rolled in, the vault had become more than a library. It was alive with visitors. Scholars dropped by with boxes of fragile papers. Collectors called in hopes of saving their reputations. Even students from nearby schools came for workshops. The once quiet shelves now hummed with activity. But the attention brought new weight. Every day Malik returned with updates on the lawsuits. Blake Harrison had escalated, hiring aggressive attorneys determined to bury the fund under paperwork. They're demanding financial records, board minutes, even Leah's notebooks, Malik reported one morning, laying a thick stack of documents on the table. Amir rubbed his forehead. They want to overwhelm us. They think we'll fold under the pressure. Leah frowned, hugging her diary tightly. Do they really want my notes? They're just questions and mistakes. Ruth leaned over and kissed her daughter's forehead. That's exactly why they want them. They're hoping to turn your learning into weakness. But Malik shook his head. We won't let them. We'll meet every demand but with truth, not fear. The work of preparing responses consumed the vault. Ruth organized files into labeled binders. Malik cross-checked dates and sources. Amir drafted formal replies. And Leah copied her own notes neatly, adding explanations where she had once scribbled in red ink. I'll show them, she whispered as she worked. Mistakes are not shame. Mistakes are steps. The phrase struck Ruth deeply. She repeated it under her breath as she sealed an envelope. Mistakes are steps. Meanwhile, new discoveries poured in. One collector brought a set of supposed Renaissance sketches. Under the microscope, Leah noticed the ink was modern ballpoint, faint impressions left by the tip too perfect to be from a quill. This wasn't drawn in the 1500s, she explained to the stunned collector. It was drawn last year with a pen in your pocket. The man's face went pale. At first he was angry. Then he laughed bitterly. I paid $500,000 for that pen mark, he muttered. Ruth reached out, steady but kind. At least now you know the truth. You can stop losing more. The vault recorded the case as File 003, the pen that lied. It became a teaching tool, showing how even modern forgeries can fool the wealthy when their hunger for prestige blinds them. Outside, Blake's reputation collapsed further. Courtrooms echoed with testimonies of clients who had been deceived. Newspapers dug up stories of his arrogance, his manipulation, his calculated charm. Yet still he fought. His team spread rumors that Amir's fortune had bought fake evidence. They painted Ruth as an uneducated maid playing dress-up. They dismissed Leah as a child puppet. Ruth clenched her fists when she read those headlines. They don't know how many years I scrubbed other people's truth, she said. Now I'm scrubbing lies from history. Amir placed a hand on her shoulder. Let them shout. We don't answer with noise. We answer with clarity. One evening, after another long day of sorting files, Amir invited the team into the main room. The dagger lay in its case, the forged deed beside it, and stacks of case files lined the table. We've been reacting, he said. Now it's time to lead. I want to open the vault to the public. Exhibitions, lectures, demonstrations. Let the people see with their own eyes what truth looks like under light. Malik hesitated. That will bring attention. More praise, yes, but also more attacks. Amir nodded. Truth must be strong enough to survive both. So they began planning the first exhibition. Ruth designed the layout, arranging objects in clean cases with clear labels. Leah insisted on including her mistakes, pages of red ink notes, side by side with corrected findings. People should see how learning works, she argued. If they only see perfection, they'll never believe they can do it themselves. When the exhibition opened, the hall was packed. Visitors leaned over magnifying glasses, gasping as invisible watermarks glowed under UV light. They read side-by-side comparisons of authentic seals and forged ones. They laughed nervously when they realized how easily they might have been fooled. But it was Leah who stole the evening. Standing on a small stool, she guided groups of visitors through the displays. She showed them how to tilt a page to catch the light, how to feel fibers with their fingertips, how to pause long enough to let the object speak. A woman in her 60s whispered, "I never thought I'd understand any of this." But she makes it clear. Ruth's eyes filled with pride as she watched her daughter teaching adults with ease. By the end of the night, donations flowed in. Not from billionaires or corporations but from ordinary people who dropped what they could into a small box labeled "Support Truth." Coins, bills, even handwritten notes of encouragement. Amir picked up one note written on lined paper. "I may not be rich, but I believe in what you're doing. Don't stop." He folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. It meant more than any fortune. The vault had become more than a project. It was a cause. But Blake Harrison was still out there, his pride wounded, his empire crumbling. And everyone in the vault knew, his final strike was still to come. Winter set in with sharp winds, and the chill seemed to carry the tension of battles yet to be fought. The Vault of Truth was busier than ever, but so were the courtrooms. Blake Harrison's empire was collapsing, yet he refused to surrender. His lawyers pressed harder, filing injunctions, demanding hearings, and feeding the press with carefully crafted sound bites. One morning Malik walked into the vault carrying a thick envelope stamped with official seals. "The trial is scheduled," he announced grimly. "Federal court. They want Leah on the stand." Ruth froze. "She's just a child. They can't put her through that." Malik shook his head. "They can. And they will. Blake's team wants to paint her as unreliable. They think if they break her confidence they break our case." Amir clenched his jaw. "They underestimate her. She will not be broken." Still, Ruth spent that night awake, pacing the floor of their apartment. She had fought through years of invisibility, years of being dismissed as the help. Now her daughter carried the weight of exposing lies bigger than any one person. Could Leah withstand it? Leah meanwhile seemed calm. She sat at the kitchen table copying her notes into a fresh notebook, her handwriting steady. "If they ask me what I saw, I'll tell them," she said. The paper was smooth. The ink sat on top. The dot was wrong. That's all. Ruth stared at her daughter's small hands gripping the pen and whispered, "May truth protect you." The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed with lawyers, journalists, and curious onlookers. Blake Harrison sat at the defense table, his suit pressed, his hair perfect, his expression calm but icy. He looked like a man determined to reclaim control. When Leah was called to the witness stand, Ruth's hands shook. But Leah climbed the step stool, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Her voice did not tremble. The attorney for the defense began with a smile that looked more like a trap. "Leah, you're 10 years old, correct?" "Yes," she answered plainly. "You've never been trained as a professional historian, have you?" "No. I'm learning." "And yet, you claim you discovered that my client's deed was a forgery?" Leah nodded. "Yes, because it is." The lawyer smirked, turning to the jury. "Tell me, how can a child who hasn't finished grade school know more than experts with decades of experience?" Leah tilted her head. "Because I paid attention." The room stirred with murmurs. The lawyer frowned but pressed on. "Let's be precise. What exactly did you notice?" Leah opened her notebook. 3 things. 1. The paper is machine-made, not hand-scraped. 2. The ink sits on the surface. Real ink from that time bites into the paper. 3. The seal has a dotted FA. That dot didn't exist yet. It belongs to a later century. The lawyer scoffed. "You're saying one dot proves everything?" Leah's voice was steady. "Yes, because history is built on details. If one detail doesn't belong, the whole story falls apart." Silence hung over the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward. The defense attorney tried again, raising his voice. "But surely you've made mistakes before? You're only a child." Leah nodded calmly. "Yes, I make mistakes. I write them down in red ink. I correct them. That's how I learn. But this isn't a mistake. This is truth." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. Amir sat taller, pride radiating from him. When Leah stepped down, the courtroom buzzed. Even journalists who had come expecting a spectacle scribbled notes with renewed seriousness. The narrative was shifting. The child was not a puppet. She was a witness. The prosecution followed with expert testimony, Professor Hale, Malik, and 2 independent conservators. They confirmed Leah's findings with technical detail, but it was her simple clarity that lingered in everyone's mind. That evening, headlines exploded: "Child witness holds firm against Harrison's lawyers." Clips of her saying, "Because I paid attention," spread quickly, not just among academics but across ordinary households. For many, her words felt like a lesson beyond history, a reminder that truth was not about age, wealth, or power. It was about paying attention. Back in the vault, Leah placed her notebook carefully on the shelf. "That's done," she said quietly. Ruth hugged her tightly. "You were braver than anyone in that room." Amir's voice was steady but warm. "You reminded them that truth does not need polish. It only needs courage." Malik added with a rare smile, "And you taught a whole jury that sometimes the smallest voice carries the heaviest weight." Outside, Blake Harrison's face appeared on every screen, but no amount of polished interviews could undo the image of a child calmly dismantling his empire with 3 simple observations. The tide was turning. Yet Amir knew one thing: Blake was not finished. His pride would not let him walk away. The final clash was still ahead. The courtroom victory gave the vault a surge of credibility. People across the country began to see Leah not as a pawn in a fight but as a young truth-teller who had faced powerful men and stood unshaken. Yet the recognition brought both opportunity and danger. Newspapers published long features about Amir's transformation from ambitious tycoon to a man who chose integrity over empire. Ruth was invited to speak on panels about cultural preservation, where she spoke humbly of her journey from invisibility to curatorship. And Leah, though still a child, received letters from schools, asking her to visit and share her story. One letter stood out. It was from a 5th grade class in Ohio. The children had drawn pictures of magnifying glasses, books, and tiny dots. At the bottom they had written, "Thank you for showing us that paying attention matters." Leah pinned the letter above her desk. "They understand," she whispered proudly. But even as admiration grew, Blake Harrison plotted his counterattack. His empire was bleeding, his credibility shredded, yet he still had money and allies. His legal team filed appeals, his spokespeople filled talk shows, and anonymous accounts spread rumors online that the vault itself was hiding forgeries. "They want to turn our strength into suspicion," Malik explained grimly one evening. "If they can't discredit the truth, they'll try to muddy the water until people stop trusting anyone." Amir leaned forward. "Then we will go further. We won't just defend. We'll reveal. If they want to see our work, we'll open everything. No secrecy, no locked boxes. Full transparency." So the vault launched an online archive. Every case file, the deed, the dagger, the forged sketches, was scanned, annotated, and uploaded for anyone to examine. The process, the mistakes, the corrections, the results, all made public. The reaction was overwhelming. Teachers downloaded the files for their classrooms. Amateur historians shared discoveries of their own. Museums began requesting collaborations. The Vault of Truth was no longer just a private project. It was becoming a public institution. Ruth watched the growth with awe. "I used to live in rooms where I was told to stay quiet, stay unseen. Now people ask for my notes, my labels, my order. For the first time, what I write matters." Leah smiled. "Because you pay attention, Mama. That's all it takes." But Blake struck back harder. One morning, news broke that a new expert panel funded by his allies had declared the forged deed plausible again. They claimed Leah's observations were interesting but inconclusive. Headlines screamed that the truth was under debate. Ruth slammed the paper onto the table. "They're trying to erase everything." Amir stayed calm. "Then we show them the evidence again. Slowly. Patiently. They can shout debate. We will show clarity." And so they prepared Case File 004, the archive of evidence. It was their boldest file yet, containing every step of their investigation. They included scans of authentic seals from multiple regions, microscope photos of fibers, chemical analysis reports, and detailed timelines. On the first page, Leah wrote, "We are not asking you to believe us. We are asking you to look. If you pay attention, you will see." The file spread like wildfire. Teachers praised its clarity. Journalists cited its charts. Even skeptics admitted that the evidence was undeniable. The expert panel funded by Blake looked increasingly like a desperate stunt. Meanwhile, the vault prepared its second public exhibition. This one was larger, held in a city museum, and open to the public free of charge. Ruth organized every display with precision. Leah insisted on interactive stations where visitors could test objects under UV light or feel the difference between real vellum and modern paper. The night of the opening, hundreds of people crowded the museum halls. Families came with children. Retired teachers brought their former students. Reporters hovered with cameras ready. Amir gave a short speech. "We are not here to humiliate. We are here to teach. Forgeries steal from all of us. Truth belongs to everyone." Then he stepped aside for Leah. She led a group of children to a table with magnifying glasses and simple documents. "This paper is real," she explained, holding one page to the light. "See the uneven fibers? That's because it was made by hand. Now look at this one. Perfect, smooth, no flaws. That means it was made by machine. One is honest. One is pretending." The children leaned closer, gasping with excitement as they discovered the differences for themselves. Ruth stood at a distance, tears forming in her eyes. She whispered, "She's giving them the gift no one gave us, the power to see." But in the shadows of the museum, Blake Harrison himself appeared. Dressed in a dark coat, he stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. His eyes were sharp, his jaw tight, his presence heavy. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than words. Malik noticed first and tensed. "He's here," he whispered to Amir. Amir did not flinch. "Let him watch. He cannot unmake what these children now see with their own eyes." Blake stayed for less than an hour, then left without speaking. But his appearance sent ripples through the exhibition. Reporters whispered, speculating about his intentions. Some feared confrontation. Others sensed his desperation. That night, when the vault team returned home, Ruth voiced what everyone felt. "He's planning something. That man doesn't just appear for nothing." Amir nodded. "The storm isn't over. We need to be ready." Leah, still clutching her diary, whispered quietly, "No matter what he does, the dot will still be wrong." Her words, simple and unwavering, cut through the tension. For all Blake's wealth and fury, the truth was still stronger. But in their hearts, each of them knew, the fight was moving to its final chapter. The weeks after the museum exhibition felt like the calm before a storm. The vault was busier than ever, but every shadow seemed heavier, every phone call a little sharper. Blake Harrison's silent appearance at the exhibition had unsettled everyone. He had not spoken, had not acted, but his presence alone was a warning. Ruth tried to keep life normal for Leah. They still had breakfast together at the kitchen table, still walked through the park on Sundays, still studied by lamplight in the evenings. But Leah sensed the unease. Sometimes she caught her mother staring at the door as if waiting for someone to burst in. One night, Malik came to the apartment with troubling news. "Blake is preparing a countersuit," he said. "Not just against the fund. Against Amir personally. He's claiming defamation, fraud, and intentional destruction of his reputation." Amir sat quietly, sipping his tea before answering. "He thinks if he destroys me, the vault will collapse." Malik's eyes narrowed. "He doesn't understand. The vault is bigger than one man now. But the threat was real. If Blake succeeded, Amir's fortune could be drained in legal fees. The fund could close. The exhibitions could end. Everything they had built might be crushed under the weight of court filings. Leah listened in silence, hugging her diary close. Finally she said, "If he takes money, he still can't take the truth. The dot will still be wrong." Her words brought a quiet strength to the room. Amir reached out and placed his hand over hers. "Yes, child. The dot will still be wrong." The trial began in early spring. This time it was not just about one deed or one forgery. It was about character, credibility, and power. Blake arrived each day with a team of lawyers, polished and aggressive. Amir arrived with Malik, Ruth, and Leah, carrying only boxes of files and evidence. The courtroom was tense. Reporters filled the benches. Cameras waited outside the doors. Every statement, Every gesture was dissected in the media. Blake's attorneys painted Amir as a bitter man who had turned to lies when his own fortune began to slip. They mocked Ruth as a maid-playing curator. They described Leah as a child manipulated to serve an adult's agenda. Each insult stung, but the vault team stayed composed. When it was their turn, they responded not with speeches but with method. They presented case files 001 through 004 in order, each one laid out with evidence, photographs, and expert testimony. Leah was called again to the stand. This time she was ready. The defense attorney sneered, "So, you still claim a single dot proves my client is a fraud?" Leah met his gaze without flinching. "Yes. Because history doesn't lie. People do." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even the judge raised an eyebrow at her steady tone. The prosecution followed with Professor Hale, who confirmed every detail with technical depth. Malik testified about the notebook from Blake's former assistant, showing the planned forgery methods. Ruth spoke quietly about cataloging each item, her careful notes proving a chain of evidence. And finally, Amir himself took the stand. "I was ready to buy the lie," he admitted. "I wanted it to be true. I wanted glory so badly that I ignored the warning signs. But a child told me to stop the pen. That pause saved me, and it saved history. If you punish me for listening to truth, then you're punishing the very foundation of justice." The closing arguments echoed across the courtroom. Blake's lawyers shouted about pride and reputation. The vault side whispered about patience, evidence, and detail. When the jury left to deliberate, the air felt electric. Hours passed. Ruth clutched Leah's hand the entire time. Amir sat perfectly still, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Finally the jury returned. The foreperson stood and read the verdict. The vault of truth was cleared of all charges. Amir was cleared of all accusations. Blake Harrison's countersuit was dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed out to broadcast the decision. Blake sat frozen, his jaw tight, his empire now officially crumbling. Leah exhaled in relief and whispered, "The dots stayed wrong." Ruth hugged her so tightly she almost lifted her off the ground. Malik smiled, rare, genuine, tired. And Amir, though quiet, had tears glistening in his eyes. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Some were historians. Some were students. Many were just ordinary people who had followed the story from afar. When Amir stepped onto the steps, they erupted in applause. He raised his hand for silence. "We did not win today because of wealth or age or power. We won because truth is stronger than pride. Remember this, truth does not shout. It waits. And when you pay attention, it speaks." The crowd cheered. Reporters recorded every word. That night, back in the vault, the team sat together around the table. The dagger lay in its case, the forged deed beside it, and the case files stacked neatly. Amir poured tea and said, "This is not the end. This is the beginning. The vault must grow beyond us. One day it will not need my fortune or my name. It will stand on its own, because truth stands on its own." Leah opened her diary and wrote her final note of the day. The dot was wrong. The truth was right. And the work continues tomorrow. For the first time in months, Ruth allowed herself to exhale fully. They had faced Blake's fury, endured humiliation, and carried the weight of courts and headlines. But they had not broken. The vault of truth had survived. And somewhere in the silence of the night, history itself seemed to breathe easier, knowing it had been protected. The courtroom battle was over, but life in the vault did not return to silence. Instead, it entered a new chapter, one where truth was no longer just defended but shared openly with the world. The verdict had made headlines around the country. Articles praised the courage of a little girl who had stood against wealth and intimidation. Documentaries began reaching out, asking to tell the story of the dot that exposed a lie. Teachers requested lesson plans inspired by the case files. For the first time, the Vault of Truth was not only a place of research but a source of education for ordinary people. Amir understood the importance of this moment. "We cannot keep this locked in glass," he told the team. "History must belong to everyone. That is the only way lies will stop finding buyers." So the vault launched a new program, Truth for All. It included traveling exhibitions, online workshops, and simplified case files designed for schools and libraries. Ruth took charge of the catalog system, adapting it into teaching materials. She wrote guides that explained how to examine objects step by step, using plain language anyone could understand. Leah insisted that her red ink mistakes be included in the materials. If they only see perfect answers, they won't believe they can do it themselves, she explained. People need to see that mistakes are part of learning. Her honesty made the program even more relatable. Soon, children across the country were using worksheets that asked them to spot differences between real and fake seals, to hold paper to the light, to slow down and pay attention. Meanwhile, the vault itself grew. Donations poured in, not just from wealthy patrons but from ordinary families who sent what they could, $10, $5, sometimes just a handwritten note of encouragement. One envelope contained a single dollar bill and a note scrawled in pencil. "This is all I have, but I want to help protect the truth." Amir placed that bill in a glass frame by the entrance. "This is our most precious donation," he said, "because it carries sacrifice." Yet for all the progress, shadows still lingered. Blake Harrison had vanished from the public eye after his courtroom defeat, but his name remained bitter on many tongues. Some still defended him, arguing that he had been unfairly targeted. Others speculated he was planning a return, waiting for the right moment. Malik, ever cautious, warned the team not to relax. Men like him don't disappear. They wait. And when they strike where no one expects. But Ruth chose not to live in fear. "If he comes back, we will face him again," she said firmly. "We've already proven that truth can survive his noise." Leah, meanwhile, grew more confident each day. She began keeping 2 diaries, one for her personal notes and one for the vault, where she wrote down lessons for others. On the first page of the vault diary she wrote, "Pay attention. Slow is fast. Mistakes are steps." One afternoon, the vault received an unusual delivery. A battered wooden chest, sent anonymously, arrived at the door. Inside were bundles of letters, maps and artifacts from the late 1800s. The note attached read simply, "These were hidden for years. I trust you to tell their true story." Leah and Ruth unpacked the items carefully. The documents told a story of migration, trade, and survival, lives of ordinary people whose names had never appeared in textbooks. Ruth's eyes filled with tears as she read a letter from a woman describing the planting of seeds in foreign soil, praying they would grow. "This is history too," Ruth whispered. "Not just kings and empires. Ordinary lives. Forgotten voices." Amir nodded. "Then we must give them space in the vault. Truth is not only in grand objects. It is in small stories too." The team began working on case file 005, the letters of the forgotten. It was different from the others, not about exposing forgery but about preserving memory. For Ruth it felt deeply personal. She knew what it meant to be invisible, to have your work erased. These letters gave her the chance to give voice to those who had been overlooked. The file became one of their most powerful exhibitions. Visitors lingered longest at the simple letters, written in faded ink by hands long gone. They whispered as they read about farmers, traders, and mothers, people whose truth had never been honored. Leah stood by one case and said softly, "The dot was wrong, but these words are right. And they need us too." As spring turned to summer, the vault's reputation soared. Universities began citing its methods. Students applied for internships. The Smithsonian even reached out, inviting Amir and Leah to consult on a new exhibition about authenticity. Yet through all the recognition, the family remained grounded. Every evening, they still gathered around the kitchen table for simple meals. Ruth still wrote carefully in her ledgers. Amir still poured tea with steady hands. And Leah still ended each night with her diary, closing the day with one line of reflection. One evening she wrote, "Truth feels heavy sometimes, but carrying it makes you stronger." When she showed it to her mother, Ruth kissed her forehead. Stronger, yes. And freer. But deep inside, Malik's warning echoed. Blake Harrison was silent, but silence was never the end. Somewhere he was watching, waiting, nursing the wound of defeat. And the vault knew, the fight for truth was not finished. It had only shifted into its next stage. The summer heat pressed heavy against the city, but inside the vault the air was cool, steady, alive with purpose. Rows of case files lined the shelves. The dagger rested quietly in its glass box, no longer a false symbol but an honest story. The forged deed lay preserved as evidence, its lie forever exposed. The new collection of letters and maps, carefully catalogued by Ruth, brought forgotten voices back into the light. The vault was no longer a secret place. It had become a living institution. Scholars visited daily. Students filled the reading rooms. Families stopped by, eager to let their children see what truth looked like under a magnifying glass. The world had begun to trust this once small project with the weight of its memories. But in the midst of that growth came one final shadow. Malik entered late one evening, a newspaper folded under his arm. He laid it on the table, the headline bold across the front. Blake Harrison declares bankruptcy, blames witch hunt. Ruth exhaled sharply. He's still twisting the story. Malik nodded grimly. He's lost his empire, but he wants the last word. He's telling anyone who will listen that he was the victim of jealousy and a smear campaign. Amir poured tea, his hands steady. Let him have his words. We have evidence. We have clarity. History will remember who told the truth. Leah, sitting with her diary, added softly, he can tell stories, but the dot will still be wrong. Those simple words silenced the room. For all of Blake's noise, nothing could undo the reality of ink, paper, and seal. Weeks passed and Blake vanished from the headlines. His voice grew quieter, his circle smaller. He had tried to fight with pride and power, but truth had worn him down. Meanwhile, the vault's influence continued to grow. A university dedicated a wing to teaching Leah's methods. Ruth was invited to oversee the creation of a permanent traveling exhibition. Amir began working on a book, not about wealth or empire but about integrity and humility. And Leah, though still a child, became a symbol for students everywhere who wanted to believe that paying attention mattered. One afternoon, the team gathered in the library for a small private ceremony. They placed the first 5 case files, the deed, the dagger, the pen sketches, the archive of evidence, and the letters of the forgotten, into a locked archival cabinet, built to preserve them for generations. These are not just files, Amir said quietly. They are lessons. Proof that truth is not fragile. Proof that lies can be broken by patience and courage. Ruth added, and proof that even ordinary people, a maid, a child, a man who almost made a mistake, can protect history if they stand together. Leah wrote the final line in her vault diary, the work continues tomorrow. She closed the book and placed it beside the cabinet. As the sun set outside the wide glass windows, the 3 of them stood in silence. No speeches. No applause. Just a quiet recognition that they had built something stronger than any fortune. A home for truth. The story of the Vault of Truth reminds us of something simple but powerful. Lies can be loud, but truth is patient. It waits in the details, in the fibers of paper, in the faint marks of ink, in the voices that history tries to silence. And when someone is willing to slow down, pay attention, and listen, truth will always speak. It doesn't matter if you're young or old, rich or poor, celebrated or invisible, your eyes, your questions, your courage matter. Like Leah, you can choose to pay attention. Like Ruth, you can protect forgotten voices. Like Amir, you can stop the pen before it signs a lie. So take this story with you. Share it. Live it. And remember, the work of protecting truth doesn't belong only to vaults or scholars. It belongs to all of us. Because in the end, truth is not just history. Truth is the foundation of justice, dignity, and freedom. And it always, always deserves to be defended.